Hello and welcome to Webb Chat. Noel T manning the second here. So glad that you could join us as we explore the people, the stories, and the connections to the Gardner-Webb community and the greater community. Today, we're excited to be able to welcome Zach Dressel and also Mary Beth Martin from the Earl Scruggs Center. A lot of connections relating to Earl Scruggs here at Gardner-Webb University and in this community. So very excited to talk about the Earl Scruggs Center, especially an exhibit that celebrates and pays tribute to the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. Mary Beth and Zach, thank you so much for being here with us on Webb Chat. Thanks for making the trip from Shelby all the way to Boiling Springs to the Elliott House. Thank you.
Glad to. Thanks
Beautiful
for having
ride.
us on.
So I'd love for you both, before we dive into today's show, talk a little bit about who you are, introduce yourselves, your names and your positions, and also why the Earl Scruggs Center? What drew you to the Earl Scruggs Center? Mary Beth, we'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Mary Beth Martin. I'm the executive director at the Earl Scruggs Center, and I've been in that position since 2018. Yes, it seems like not very long ago I was here working at Gardner-Webb University, so it's good to be back. But I was just drawn to the Earl Scruggs Center because I felt like it was such an incredible organization that was doing great work in the community. When the Scruggs Center began in 2014, or when the organization opened then, I felt like Uptown Shelby was a place with a lot of opportunity, meaning it was kind of dead. And so once the Scruggs Center opened, you saw the revitalization of Uptown Shelby. You saw businesses open, restaurants open, and stay open instead of opening and then closing after a month. And I felt like the organization was bringing very important cultural resources to Cleveland County. And so it just seemed like a great opportunity to work in a field that, I didn't have much experience in, but was very interested. I've always been interested in the music, certainly in bluegrass and beyond, but also the history of this community, which is so rich and unique.
Yeah. Zach?
Yeah, my name is Zach Dressel. I'm the assistant director and curator at the Earl Scruggs Center, and I've been with the Earl Scruggs Center since 2020, and started as the curator and then was promoted a couple years later to assistant director. And really what drew me to the Earl Scruggs Center was the fact that it covers both two major passions of mine, which is a love of music and a love of history. I went to school at Appalachian State for museum studies. History has always been something I wanted to have a career in, and I've also been a guitar player for 15 years, and so music has also been a major part of my life. And so to be able to do both of those things at one time seemed like a dream job. So it's been fantastic working for the Scruggs Center and helping to build out our exhibits like the one I think we're going to be talking about today, and also helping to work with programming. I run the soundboard for our concerts, which is really fun for me, and it's been a really fun ride so far.
So both of you came, Mary Beth, you came a couple years before the pandemic. You came right at the pandemic,
Yeah.
Zach. Talk about how that changed maybe your approach and maybe some of the things you still are carrying from that time that maybe were some innovative opportunities.
So, when I came to the Scruggs Center, I wanted to focus on building out our programming and particularly involving education and local programs. The Scruggs Center was established to the point where it was considered an incredible destination for visitors from outside of our community, and I really wanted to build the resources that we offer to the community. So during COVID, we were able to take a step back and evaluate the programs that we had been providing for the last few years, and think about, to evaluate those things and decide how can we serve this community better moving forward. So during COVID, we hired Zach.
Yeah.
I think I offered Zach the job a week before.
A week or two, yeah, right
before the
shutdown.
pandemic, and then things shut down. And I remember he contacted me and he said, "Do I still have a job?" And I said, "Absolutely. Make plans to move to Shelby. We're going to pivot and we're going to figure out how to keep this museum running and how do we keep providing resources to our community during this time." And I think what it did was, of course, make us think creatively as a team And while we may not be using some of the same things that we were doing then, virtual programs, et cetera, it just helped us to realize that we didn't have to think about things the same way, that we could always innovate, and we could always use creative strategies to create more engaging programs and opportunities. And so from that has grown some of our keystone programs at the Scruggs Center, like our Bluegrass Ambassadors program, which is educational programming for all of Cleveland County's fourth graders. We're on our 5th year of that now, and we're incredibly proud of that program. Another that came out of that time was our Center Stage concert series. We started holding concerts at the Scruggs Center in a safe amount of time after COVID, but holding them in ways that were safe for folks, like selling tickets in pods, for example. Right. And so, it gave people an opportunity to come out and enjoy live music, or to just do it outside on the court square. And so a lot of those things have grown since then have become some of our really important programming.
Yeah. Zach, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that as a curator, there was a silver lining in the shutdown in that it really allowed me the opportunity to learn the source material for this new job. I'm not originally from Cleveland County. I'm from Union County, which is a similar county in terms of size and everything else. But it was imperative to me to learn about the history of this area when I moved here, and having some more time to kind of get in and learn more about it, learn more about Earl. That, I knew a bit about Earl when I first started, but I certainly was no expert. And so having that time to be able to really get comfortable before we, reopened and it's go time, was really a great opportunity for me as a curator.
Before we dive into the heart of today's dialogue, location. Let people know where the location is. I know it's in the heart of Uptown Shelby. Give that address, and then we'll dive in.
So we're located on the historic Court Square in the historic courthouse, Cleveland County Courthouse, and our address is 103 South Lafayette Street in Uptown Shelby.
Why do you think the Earl Scruggs Center is so special right now at this time in our history as we're getting ready to celebrate America's 250th anniversary? We're celebrating all year long, but leading up to July 4th, a lot of stuff's going to be going on this year.
So like Zach said, we're an organization that covers the history and the culture of this community, and both of those things are extremely important. A lot of our county's history, or when we look at the 250th, we think about Kings Mountain, and we think about the battle there and the battle just down the road at Cowpens, and how this community was pivotal, within the Revolutionary War. But there's so much more to this community than that too. And so this exhibit does a great job, which Zach will talk about, of highlighting that, about, the struggles of life on the frontier and what it was like living here during that time, and the different people who were doing that. And so, since then, our community has become extremely dynamic, specifically our culture and our contributions to American music and world music. Yeah. And so I think the Scruggs Center is just perfectly situated to talk about these things.
Voices of the Frontier. That's the name of the exhibit?
Yep. Voices of the Frontier, Cleveland County on the Eve of Independence is the full title. But yeah, Voices of the Frontier.
Talk a little bit about the exhibit, how it came to be, and what were some of the things that you discovered as you were pulling this together, where the idea came from.
Yeah, Voices of the Frontier. So as Mary Beth mentioned, Cleveland County's ties to, I guess, what we would call 1776, the 250th. A lot of the initial impression is our Revolutionary history. You talk about Battle of Kings Mountain, Cowpens being just across the border into South Carolina. I wanted to let museums, fantastic organizations like Kings Mountain Historical Museum, have that and find our own niche to talk about during the 250th. And one way in which we're doing that is I wanted to say, hey, let's talk about what Cleveland County was like at 1776 exactly, and leading up to it, and what was going on. Who were the people that were living here? What were the struggles that they were going through living in a place that was literally on the frontier of the American colonies at that time. Maps did not cover this area up until the 1790s, 1800s. So, these people were really carving out in existence for themselves in an area that was not only completely new to them, but had a ton of challenges in the fact that there were tons of different groups and cultures, communities coming together at one time and trying to figure out how to live together, in this place. And that's where this exhibit kind of came from.
So as you think about the historical accuracy, but also emotional storytelling, talk about the balance you found to be able to do that within the voices.
Yeah. So the idea behind, I guess, the voices is, like I said earlier, we wanted to cover all these different cultures. So that would mean, you have European settlers coming down from Pennsylvania, Virginia. You have an indigenous population that had been here for thousands of years. And then you also had enslaved Africans being brought with these European settlers into this area. All of these groups of people are kind of coalescing at one moment in time in one place. And what this exhibit does is it kind of covers every single point of view to the best of our ability, given the resources we have available to us. So we spend a lot of time talking about specifically the Catawba Nation and their impact in this area. We were able to find a story of a family who traces their roots back to the time of slavery, and one of their first ancestors came down from Virginia with their slave owners. And, so we were just very fortunate in that, we were able to create something that I think, and that I certainly hope, is an authentic representation of those people's experiences in this area at that time.
Now, Zach, you have a love of research.
Sure.
So as you're researching, when do you realize that, okay, this is something I love, but when do you get to a point where you're like, okay, this is something others need to appreciate as well?
There's a philosophy, which makes me sound way more important than that. There's a philosophy that I carry whenever I do exhibits, and I always have. And it comes back from when I was a child. The exhibits that I resonated with the most, and the learning about history in school, what I resonated with the most were personal stories. And so every exhibit I do, I try to incorporate as many personal stories as I can. And so in this exhibit, what that meant was doing a lot of genealogical research into some of the first earliest families here to pull out, what are some of these stories that people can connect to, because I feel very strongly that, the entire human experience is built around storytelling. That's how we share our information. And so people tend to connect with that the best. And so that's what I really aim to do with this exhibit, first and foremost. And so when I'm doing research, I'm looking for stories, kind of like a journalist to a certain extent. I'm looking for what are the good stories.
How long has this research taken you to get for preparation for this particular exhibit?
Sure. I think there's two answers to that. I have always been researching for that since I moved here. As you start to learn for other exhibits and other programs, you pull things in, and all of this becomes kind of a collective knowledge. But kind of the hardcore research around this exhibit has probably been a year and a half, roughly. And it netted a research document that is what I call a research document. It was my notes. That's probably 40 pages long. And, the original script for the exhibit, which people who go to it will be happy they don't have to read because it was so long. I think it was like 7,500 words was the original script. And then I let Mary Beth chop it down, to a more manageable amount for people who actually don't want to be there all day reading stuff. But what you learn through doing that is this area just has such a rich history, and it is so fascinating, how many different parts of the broader national story, the state of North Carolina story, a lot of those things have connections and ties here to Cleveland County, and that's throughout the entire history of Cleveland County. And so I love doing the research around it. It's always fun for me.
And Mary Beth, I know you've been a part of a group that's been preparing for the 250th celebration, and it's happening all across the nation. There are pockets, and talk a little bit about that aspect of being a part of a group that kind of plans and thinks about something that's this significant to our nation's history.
Well, it's really important for an organization like the Earl Scruggs Center to participate in that, to look at this important moment in our nation's history and celebrate it in the best way we can at the Scruggs Center. I just want to say that Zach mentioned that we have this really unique history in Cleveland County, and I think the Scruggs Center, we have a unique resource in the Cleveland County Historical Collection, which proves that people in Cleveland County have cared about their history for a very, very long time, dating back to the 1970s when the Cleveland County Historical Museum started acquiring items for the collection. So this has been an incredible resource to us through the years, with items dating back, to this time that Zach can actually pull out for this exhibit. Just a really interesting thing to look at and to use for an exhibit like this.
So, Zach, what are some of the things that visitors will see when they walk in? What can they expect to experience with this exhibit when we're looking at the voices?
So there were two things that I wanted to do when we were kind of looking or curating objects for this exhibit. They either needed to be of the period, as Mary Beth mentioned, so 18th century, I would let some things slip into the early 19th century because, to be honest, things just, you're talking about 250 years. So some stuff doesn't survive. But it also... it was imperative to me to have it tie to some family, have some, again, looking at the stories so that way it would say something. So some things that really jump out that I think will jump out to people when they go through the exhibit. The focal point of the exhibit is a fantastic barn loom that is, I think it's probably 6 to 8 feet long and about 5 to 6 feet wide. Massive loom for weaving, and we believe it came out of the Poston log cabin that was owned by the Poston family, built right around the turn of the 18th century. We believe this loom dates to about 1800. But it is very representative of kind of the home industries that people had at the time. It was obvious that the Postons used this loom not only as a way to clothe their family, but as a way probably to make a secondary source of income. They would probably sell to their neighbors fabric that was coming off of this loom. They were a huge investment at the time. And so to have a surviving example in the collection, when many of them, there's one of the reasons they're called barn looms is because after people stopped using them, they would just throw them in their barns and they'd rot. So to have one that has survived this long and is in remarkably good shape and is more or less complete. It is, all the pieces are pretty much there. Is just such a pleasure for us to be able to present to people. And then there's even some really cool stuff. We have a vest. Waistcoat that was owned by Colonel John Martin Roberts of the Roberts family. And he was not serving in Cleveland County during the Revolutionary War. He was actually serving in Virginia under George Washington as his quartermaster. And so he wore this vest while he was serving during that time. I could go on and on. There's so many things in that exhibit, but those are just a couple of the big standouts, that come to mind.
What do you think these type of physical pieces can do for visitors that seeing something in a textbook or either seeing it online? How can this bring it real and make it connect closer to the stories?
So I think what physical objects allow for us to do is create a physical connection. I like to hope it happens for me this way, that whenever I see something in an exhibit and it says this was owned by this person, my brain immediately starts imagining what this would have looked like in their house or on their person if they were wearing it as a piece of clothing. And then you start to consider, as I was saying earlier, how impressive it is that this thing has survived this many years and has clearly been cared for and loved by the family that owned it for this many years and has been maintained by a museum for the past 50 years. In the case of that loom, it was donated in 76 as part of the bicentennial. That's when they created the original Cleveland County History Museum. So for it to, just go through this entire life, and continue to survive, I think is just such a fantastic story in and of itself, let alone the provenance behind it and the story behind it to begin with. And so I think it creates a very visceral connection for people when they're in the space.
Anytime I'm involved in research, no matter what it is, there's always a surprise I feel like you talk about being kind of the reporter or journalist, and you're uncovering pieces of things that you want to learn. Were there any big surprises for you as you were working on the preparation? This goes out to both of you for this exhibit.
Yeah, one of the big surprises actually has a connection to Mary Beth and her family. There's a book that I used in the research called The Hamrick Generations, I believe is what it's called, and it's a book by a man named S.C. Jones. It was written around 1919, 1920, and it has always been kind of one of the definitive genealogical histories of the Hamrick family, which Mary Beth is a part of, and it was so great to be able to use that, and there's a bunch of these great images in that book of historical items. And then one day I was going through our offsite storage and found a box of things that had not been documented for whatever reason. They were donated at one time and just, hadn't been formally accessioned into the museum's collection. And I started pulling things out, and what I realized is that we had all of the original printing plates from that book that they used to make the illustrations, and all the original photographs and original pages from the book. So you could see, and it had S.C. Jones's writing on the back talking about how much it was going to cost for him to get this illustration put into his book. And so to be able to have that is just amazing, because, you can very, for real see the connection between the research and, now that's going to be an artifact in the exhibit, which is so amazing, for me to be able to do.
Mary Beth.
And I think that this exhibit will, just be so personal, or will have this, or build this really strong personal connection for a lot of people in this community to the history. Like Zach mentioned, the Hamrick family. There are thousands of Hamrick family descendants. I'm one of them in this community, as well as some of these other families that Zach mentions in the exhibit. The Roberts family, they have a reunion every year, and they have an incredible amount of descendants in this community. And so I think that there will be people from many generations here in Cleveland County and beyond who maybe their family goes back to this community and they're not living here anymore, who will have personal ties to this exhibit, which I think makes it extremely powerful. I do, because it just shows how these families have been here for such a long time and have contributed to Cleveland County and to our history and our success, to present day, but going back to the time of the Revolution. And I'm really proud of the way Zach's been able to make those connections and tie all these objects and these stories in a way that will really connect with people today.
One of the things, Zach, you mentioned was having handwriting, original handwriting that dates back. And handwriting is something that has continued throughout, even today when we text and so much is digital. People still want people's autographs. So there's something special about the actual writing that comes from someone else's person. And I know for me, I've got tons of material of what my dad wrote over the years, but the things that speak to me mostly are the ones where I can look at his handwriting. And I recognize his handwriting compared to anybody else's. Same way with my mom's. I can look at hers and like, yep, that's my mom's handwriting. And there's something incredible about that. So from a personal history standpoint, going back, and even things from my grandparents that I've got that were written, it's lovely because you knew it came directly from their brain, through their body, through their hand, onto that piece of paper, no matter how they did that. So, seeing those pieces, I've always been fascinated by my personal writings. Yep.
And it's really interesting to see that all through the collection, whether it's tied to this exhibit or not, where you see personal correspondence. Like you said, we don't really do that anymore, and to see how people wrote to one another about just the things that were happening day to day, on postcards or in, short letters, things like that, the communication and the correspondence. And then the other thing that I love to see throughout the collection is handwriting on photos, actually labeling the people in the photo, what was happening at this time. We see that in the Cleveland County Historical Collection and in the Earl Scruggs Center's collection. We have a vast archive of photos from the Scruggs family where Earl's wife, Louise, actually, we see her handwriting on those photos, identifying people or, telling us what was happening or just the date. That is a really cool personal connection. Zach, are you putting, or tell us about the letter that you have from George Washington? Speaking of handwriting
Yeah.
and seeing like the man himself.
I was just going to say
seeing
that.
object.
Speaking of famous autographs, I'm not really sure. This does not have a Cleveland County tie. This document, it is in the Cleveland County Historical Collection, has been again for probably 50 years. But we actually have a shipping document that somebody was bringing in goods from Europe to the Americas, and it's signed by President George Washington when he was president of the United States. And so that's probably, whenever I first started at the Scruggs Center, actually, I spent a lot of days over in our offsite storage just kind of going through things. And that was one of the few jaw-dropping moments that I've had over there, where you just open up a cabinet and, oh, there's George Washington's signature, on a piece of paper. And it's in amazing condition. It's just, it's unreal. I think there's going to be several letters in the exhibit too. There's 2 letters by a man named Thomas Gilchrist, who actually lived in Halifax County, out on more towards the coast, that talk specifically about the lead up to the Revolutionary War. He's writing back to his family in Scotland and saying things are getting pretty bad. He talks about a lot of unrest here in North Carolina in his letters that he's writing home, and we have those physical letters in our collection, and they're going to be on display in the exhibit. So it's, to your point, Noel, you can't over-exaggerate just how important seeing these things written and how real that makes it,
Voices of the Frontier at the Earl Scruggs Center. What are the dates? What's the ending date? Because I know it starts in April.
That's right. You have most of the rest of the year to see that exhibit, and we really encourage folks to come out and do that. And then also go visit those other institutions in Cleveland County that are presenting history from that time, like the Kings Mountain Historical Museum. I believe the Dover Library here at Gardner-Webb is going to be presenting an exhibit or some programming around it too. So there are other organizations in the community that are celebrating America 250 as well.
If there's one thing that you would like for visitors to walk away from when they leave this exhibit, what would that be?
Really just a greater appreciation for the people who lived here at that time and a greater understanding of what it meant to live here. I think, the 250th is an amazing opportunity to celebrate the nation's past in a meaningful way, but sometimes one thing that gets maybe a little overshadowed is the struggle that led to that opportunity, especially in this area where people were just trying to eke out an existence, and then they're also having this massive conflict over independence at the same time. And so what I really hope is that people walk away with a greater appreciation of the people that came here before.
Mary Beth, anything from you?
I think Zach said it well for the exhibit, and I think that resonates too, for a visitor at the Scruggs Center too. So in addition to visiting the exhibit, I hope people will really take time to go through the museum and our exhibits and come away with really how rich our history and culture is here in Cleveland County, and how much Cleveland County people, musicians like Earl or Sonny Terry or Don Gibson, have contributed to this country and to the culture of the music of America and beyond.
Let's pivot to the music aspect of what that people can find at the Earl Scruggs Center. So if someone's listening to this or watching this and have never been, what are other things they can expect? You touched on some of the music, live performances. Talk about some of those things. This is your chance to celebrate those as well.
Sure. So we have really a world-class museum experience at the Earl Scruggs Center. We tie in, local history, so we tell the story of Cleveland County alongside Earl's story. And our museum experience includes some incredible interactive exhibits, which we just installed early this year. Really some very engaging interactive exhibits where visitors can explore the music and the history of the entire region and learn really about all the diverse genres and musicians and styles that came together to create, really what I think is the most the richest style of music here in America. And so we have, of course, the museum experience, but we also have a ton of programming. So exhibit-related programming that you can see throughout the year in connection to this exhibit, as well as our educational programming. We also host field trips. In the summer, we have banjo and guitar camps. And then, of course, we're involved in the Earl Scruggs Music Festival in the fall. So there's a lot going on at the Scruggs Center. I just encourage people to join our newsletter list and visit our website and follow us on socials to keep up with all the things we're doing.
So how do they join the newsletter list?
So you go to our website and you sign up, click Join Newsletter.
And our website address?
EarlScruggsCenter.org, www.earlscruggscenter.org.
Awesome. And our state magazine has given a lot of love to the Earl Scruggs Center. Was that this past year?
So in September, there was an Our State Magazine article about our work on the Earl Scruggs home place, which is just down the road here in Boiling Springs. It was the place where Earl Scruggs spent the formative years of his life, from about 1932 to 1942. And this was the time in which he was developing the Scruggs style, where he was learning to play a three-finger style that would later become known as Scruggs style. And so we were able to purchase that property in the summer of 2024, and we've been carefully and lovingly restoring it since then.
And when will that be? Have you got a timeline on when that's going to be ready?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Restoration projects, preservation projects by nature take a long time, and we have to be extremely careful in sourcing materials and the methods that we use to restore the home place. I'd love to say that it'll be ready in a year. I'm not sure. So I just encourage people to follow our work and to follow us on socials and our website and to learn more about that.
Awesome. Mary Beth, Zach, thank you so much for both being here today talking about the voices of the frontier and the Earl Scruggs Center. Any final thoughts or comments you want to make sure you share that maybe I did not ask?
I think I've talked plenty.
I just want to encourage folks to visit us. It's a really incredible experience. There's so much going on in Cleveland County. It's a really special place. So, in addition to visiting the Earl Scruggs Center, there are other things to do too. So I just encourage folks to come out and take advantage of everything that this community offers.
And I do want to throw this out there. I know that volunteers are a major support mechanism for the Earl Scruggs Center. Talk about that if you would, and if anybody wants to volunteer for any aspect of what it is you do, how could they do that?
So, volunteers are one of the reasons why we can do what we do. So volunteers are the people who greet our visitors and who serve as guides around the museum. And so what I hear from volunteers is that they absolutely love doing that for us because they get to meet people from literally all over the world and share their love of this community with them. They're often, tour guides of the community too, because, they're the people who get the questions, where do I go eat or what else do I do here? And so it's just a really neat opportunity to engage with just a wide variety of people. Volunteers also help us for special events too, like our upcoming Remembering Earl fundraising concert or our concert series or educational programming. We have volunteers who are just passionate about education. They may be retired teachers, and they come and they help with our field trips. Or musicians who want to get involved in teaching and demonstrating instruments to children. So we just encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about those opportunities to reach out to us, info@earlscruggscenter.org, or giving us a call. And we'd love to find a place for you.
You mentioned people come from around the world, and I can actually attest to that because my cousins are from New Zealand. And when they came to visit, one of the things they wanted to do was to come to this museum. And so, Amy and Norm, shout out to you as you're back in New Zealand. I hope you enjoyed your time. I know you did when you came to the Earl Scruggs Center. Thanks again to Mary Beth Martin and to Zach Dressel right here from the Earl Scruggs Center. We appreciate you both for spending time with us. And to our audience, thank you as well for joining us right here on WebbChat, coming to you from the historic Elliott House on the Gardner-Webb University campus, and WebbChat explores the people, the places, and the possibilities of connections to Gardner-Webb University. And if you want to check out what's happening again at the Earl Scruggs Center, that website, earlscruggscenter.org. And if you want to follow any of our podcasts, you can easily do that by going to the Gardner-Webb website. That's gardner-webb.edu/podcast, or wherever you find your particular podcast, whatever platform you use, you can find us there as well. Until next time, coming to you from Gardner-Webb University, the Elliott House, and the podcast suite, Noel T. Manning II for WebbChat, and that is a wrap.